Hello and welcome back to another video. If you're looking for recommendations on what manhwa to read, then here are some that I've read recently that might be of interest. Manhwa titles are timestamped in the video for your convenience. Our first manhwa for today is Physical Therapist, a modern manhwa that I've currently read up to chapter 89 on. Its main character is Lee Gi-jok, a physical therapist by trade. Gi-jok received many praises by patients that convinced him to set up his own practice. To his dismay though, it turned out to be not such a good move as he saw particularly no business. After trying to stick to it for too long, he ended up breaking up with his girlfriend of about a decade. Through this event, unexpectedly, he randomly sees a system window in front of him of physical therapist skills, levels, and overall ability. Resolved to try and pick up the pieces of his life together and start anew with this new medical system in front of him, Gi-jok is successfully hired as a physical therapist for a big hospital. What will be in store for Gi-jok as he joins this hospital as a vet but also a newbie politically? As is usually portrayed here, there will be hospital politics, jealousy, envy, and all other sorts that he will have to face. There's at least one thing that will be consistent though, is Gi-jok's view of wanting to be more helpful to patients. The story is 8 out of 10. Leading a decent life, being swayed by others, and then having to build himself back up slowly is a premise that hooked me into the story right away. The struggles building his character, allowing him to mature, and then this system awakening is normal, but there is something that happens later that I haven't seen from this type of manhwa before, so I encourage you to read to get to it. The characters are 8 out of 10. While it's not being the focus of it, there are relationships between the characters to be aware of. Yes, Gi-jok lost someone because of his earlier decisions, but he also gains colleagues, patients, and friends as he builds himself back up in this new hospital. Gi-jok himself sees the immaturity of his previous ways and looks to be the best that he can be. The art is 7 out of 10. Overall, the experience isn't bad, and I can even think of a couple of scenes that I particularly enjoyed. My only issue is that clearly after the season ended for the manhwa and then picked up for its next season, which I binged through while reading this of course, there was an updated art style that took a while to get used to. So for readers, you may find it a little bit jarring after a certain point due to this particular change, but it doesn't heavily detract from its experience. So if you're a fan of medical manhwas and enjoy main characters that have access to a system of sorts related to their ability, then Physical Therapist would be worth taking a peek at. This next manhwa to take a look at is The Cook of a Perished World, a modern manhwa that I've currently read up to chapter 81 on. The protagonist is Shin Young-jun, an individual serving his mandatory military service as a cook. Young-jun only has months away until his service time was up, but the world has other plans as it undergoes an apocalypse whilst he's still serving. Large, humanoid-like lizard beings invade the base that Young-jun is at, and he is barely able to survive. But he's able to subdue the being after very difficult effort. Shockingly, he awakens powers as a cook and so starts a journey to survive in this new world. He will have to navigate the military politics of his own base, figure out the specifics of the awakening system, maybe have others awaken as well, and get to the bottom of what happened to the world. At the very least, survival is key, but once everything is settled, everyone will be worried about their families in the main cities. The story is 10 out of 10. The hook of this manhwa immediately drew me in. The fact that the main character is in active service is a perspective that I've always been curious about for a story in this way. Young-jun within the military hierarchy is not that high, but we're able to see how potentially a military unit would approach this given situation as long as enough information is presented itself. Things will continue to grow, and Young-jun will be thrusted into a position of power that he wasn't necessarily looking for. The characters are 8 out of 10. Military and Korean society are quite hierarchical, and we see that seep into the elements of this manhwa. Both the soldiers and civilians have prejudices, assumptions, and other thoughts that Young-jun and the other soldiers have to overcome, and we slowly see a society forming around Young-jun's unit. The art is 9 out of 10. From combat, action, military formations, and overall preparation, you will see a variety of scenes, life forms, and situations for Young-jun and Ko to get through. At the very least, there is seemingly more to this whole apocalypse situation than just meets the eye, and I'm curious on how it will go moving forward. So if you're a fan of modern apocalypse manhwa but wanted a main character who is an active military service member and are curious on how a military unit could operate in this particular type of situation, then The Cook of a Perished World would definitely interest you. The Returned C-Rank Tank Won't Die is one of the 2 shorter manhwas I have for you this week. It's a modern manhwa that I've currently read up to chapter 22 on. Choi is the name of its main character, an individual living in a modern-day world that has undergone the typical fantasy trope of having gates, dungeons, and awakeners. Choi awakened as a C-rank tank and is quite the meek and afraid person. As part of a 5-man party with her very questionable boyfriend, Choi and the party are trying to clear a dungeon and encounter a hidden one, a rare sight to see. What lay inside though was clearly more than what they could handle, and Choi was sacrificed by her boyfriend and party, except for one member, so they could save their own lives. Choi, trying to survive, clambers to a ring artifact that seemingly makes her immortal, but with a condition. This doesn't change, though, her current predicament and ends up, well, let's just say quite a graphically bad time. What seems like an eternity goes to pass, and Choi resolves herself to take things into her own hands and become stronger. To put it shortly, she does. Takes revenge, but now has to deal with the condition of her immortality. What is in store for her? The potential is 7 out of 10. I personally am not a fan of these types of psychological trauma type of manhwa, but this one just intrigued me and so I tried it out. The immediate revenge that Choi achieves was something that I wasn't expecting, but that leaves the lingering question of how is she getting her immortality and what's that condition that is traded for it, as this is now the focus of the manhwa. The art is 8 out of 10. The insanity, brazen, crazy, and trauma suffering that Choi goes through is displayed almost too well. Her eyes are just so well defined with a shell of emotion that used to be there that I can't help but praise it. After the initial part though, I'm curious to see what they continue with because it very much kind of tries to shift the tone a little bit. Since this is one of the first psychological manhwa that I've tagged and covered, I don't have any things foundation-wise to base my opinion off just yet. So far though, it has at least made me curious, and it might just make you curious as well. Our other shorter story for this week is I'm a Villainess, but I Won't Live Like One, a fantasy manhwa that I've carried up to chapter 21 on. The focus of this story is on Bianca, an individual fated to be the villainess of her particular world. Well, at least from a book that she read as the child she is. Of course, it's an unbelievable thing to read about, especially as a child. Bianca waves it off as the events of a book in her mind and continues on with her life. That is, until she notices that those same events that were happening in her real life, and she recalls the book that she was reading about. Now having to face the reality of the situation, then this book clearly is potentially foreshadowing a way that her life could go. Bianca is convinced to try and change it. Not necessarily the most evil individual or child, she doesn't really have ill intentions, but due to her class and natural demeanor, she exudes that villainous energy naturally. Now with the effort to change, will she be able to, or will the plot of the book come to be? The potential is 8 out of 10. The premise itself is actually quite similar to another manhwa that I've covered on this channel. While it's not exactly the same plot, it takes the villainous route instead of the daughter route, and it still very much evokes the foreshadowing nature that would naturally come from a reincarnation or regression in the same way. Let's see what Bianca does though, and tries to do. The art is 7 out of 10. With the limited set of chapters we have so far, we haven't seen what the identity of this manhwa is capable of just yet. At least for now, it has the typical fantasy romance style, but now injected with a color palette for Bianca that is usually meant for villainesses of these types of manhwa. So if you're a fan of fantasy manhwas that have the main character's future defined in a book like Philomel the Fake from my previous videos, then I'm a Villainess but I Won't Live Like One might just be a good one for you. Another week, another highlight. For those unaware, this section of the video I update impressions for a manhwa that I've previously covered. Today's highlight is I Became a Genius in Sales, which I've now read up to chapter 56 on. Info card in description will have links to my original opinion. Jaryong, our resident regressioner, At some point, there should be a consensus on what term to use here, but anyway, Jaryong has continued living his second chance at life with his extensive experience as a salesman. Contrary to other regression manhwas, the focus hasn't been on any particular regrets that Jaryong had that was outside of his work, like family or anything. Instead, the majority of our time has been spent on getting to know Jaryong, the customers he deals with to an extent, and the coworkers, both good and bad, that he works with. We get to see a window in each of the people that he sells to, and he even gets to participate in a competition or conference of sorts that warrants the attention of some people higher within the Taylor car company. At the end of the day, though, what is Jaryong's overall goal? That's the only question on my mind. My previous scores for this manhwa were 6 out of 10 for both potential and art. The potential translates to a 5 out of 10 for story, as the overall pacing and vibe is very much on the slow and steady part of the spectrum. For those looking for some grand plan, something for Jaryong to work or strive for, it really doesn't put it front and center. The characters, on the other hand, are a little bit more interesting, as it gets a 7 out of 10 translation from me. From the customers, we get to see a little bit more of a glimpse into their lives and how Jaryong's earnest and heartfelt approach that was achieved through decades of experience still works in his early days. His co-workers have varying relationships with him. Some are genuinely happy, some are more jealous and thus having negative impressions on Jaryong. There are even those that have almost idealistic issues with how Jaryong approaches sales, and they constantly butt heads. The art goes from 6 out of 10 to 7 out of 10 though, as the sales and showmanship that Jaryong expresses is shown quite well. And I'm not sure how to explain this, but just something about this art style and the way it shows the expressions of individuals just sucks me into reading more of it. Like I talked about, it isn't the most interesting plot or the most grand stakes involved, but when I get started on reading this, I just don't stop and I completely have to binge it through, and I can partly attribute it to the fact of how it portrays its art. So if you're looking for a more laid-back manhwa that has quite an intriguing art style with a focus on Carl salesmanship, then I Became a Genius in Sales would potentially be eye-catching to you. Would you agree, or would you not? Comment down below your thoughts on I Became a Genius in Sales. And that wraps up this week's episode. Please like and subscribe if you enjoy the content, and write down in the comment section down below what manhwa you've been reading and I might just take a look. Till next time though, have a good read.